It says we're live. Welcome, everybody. Jason Stray Cat Williams and Tim Chaffee from Answers in Genesis. Jason, it's good to have you back on Miracles and Atheists, man. You came back from January when you had literally been in a car accident a couple weeks before we got on the broadcast. So props to you for doing that back then. And it looks like you're still in recovery mode here after we were talking, before the show. How's it going today?
Getting there. Hanging in there.
Understood. And welcome, Tim. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate
you. Good to be here.
Definitely. Well, one thing I do just to kind of get an understanding for where people are at, and a lot of times, and Jason, you engage quite a bit on my Facebook posts. When I put those posts out there, I just kind of want to see what people are thinking, about certain topics to get an idea of how I maybe what directions I want to go with the show and get an idea of how we want to go about things. But I put a post out there on Facebook, I don't know, probably about 2 weeks ago now. And maybe a little bit more, but it said, what's your number one reason for believing in evolution? And I used that language very specifically because I knew we're going to have responses to that. And one of the things you said, Jason, as we go through, you said that no one believes in evolution. You're confusing belief with conclusions based on evidence. Evolution is not a belief. It's a well-established fact. Believing, in quotes, is what you do when you wish to ignore the facts, and faith is what you are left with when you have no argument. And so that kind of kicked it off with a lot of the discussions that we had there. And, with Tim, I want to bring Tim out, who's been studying creation. He works for Answers in Genesis. Tim, you're part of the attractions division of Answers in Genesis. And so as I kind of wanted to kick this thing off, get your feedback on that statement as far as, is evolution, starting with you, is evolution a belief? And, why or why not? What would you say about that, man?
Yeah, I think that's an important place to start because it's always important to define terms. Belief can mean several different things. If you look in Webster's dictionary, the very second definition 1B has to do with accepting something to be true. So in this sense, I think Jason would agree that he believes evolution is true in that sense. He thinks it is. But there's also religious belief, and I think Jason's trying to avoid saying, yeah, I have that sort of belief, a religious belief in it. Right. So it's just, a lot of it comes down to semantics when you're talking about that. As far as the quotation that you gave that he cited, faith is not defined the way that he defines it. The Bible defines faith as the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's not believing in something for which you have no evidence. It's believing in something for which you have plenty of evidence and strong reasons to believe that to be true. So I think it's important to start there and to define the terms rather than speak past each other.
No, perfect. I appreciate that clarification, man. So when it comes to believing and his definition, biblical definition, Jason, what would your response be to how Christians define faith?
Well, yeah, his definitions are flawed, so we might not even be able to get off to much of a start here. Where do we even begin? So the question you brought up on Facebook, that's a flawed question. So it's kind of not even worth debating because it's flawed in the first place.
Okay, why do you say that?
Well, because evolution is not a belief. So the question's flawed. So that would end the debate right there. You don't debate a flawed question. That's just kind of a waste of time. I wanted to mention, I'm going in order here, just from what I heard you saying.
Yeah.
Answers in Genesis. So that's where this guy works. That seems like an oxymoron to me.
Let's so Tim works at Answers in Genesis, and for everybody watching, and I haven't done a stream for a while, so I just want to be clear, just clarify.
As far as I know, there are none. So that would be kind of an oxymoron. I would say that Answers in Genesis is a flawed term as well. All right, as far as the definition of faith, the definition of faith that I go by is believe in something for which you have no evidence, which is exactly what Christians do. It seems to be the doctrine.
So that's an Aaron Raw definition. You follow him?
Who?
Aaron Raw from he's a YouTube atheist guy. That's his definition as well.
It's just a dictionary definition. If I Google faith, very similar to the definition of delusion, believing in something which there's no evidence that it's there, often in light of the evidence which we do have. I don't know about his claim that you believe in something that for which there is a lot of evidence for. That sounds more to me like a conclusion. Conclusion based on evidence is very, very different than a belief, especially a belief which we ignore evidence in order to maintain.
Pause there, Jason, because I broke my own rule for those watching here. I did not set any ground rules as we got started here. So just number one, this is a dialogue. It's not a debate. I just want to have an open conversation. I think storytelling and dialogue and why we feel the way we feel is a little bit more valuable in my perspective. So when a formal debate would be, you'd have a certain amount of time. The moderator would come in and give the other person a certain amount of time. It's not really like this. We want to talk more openly and casually, right? So that's the first one. The second one is just to always be respectful, and that's for.
I actually kind of agree with him that it is good to define terms.
Yeah, absolutely.
I totally agree with that, but.
And so the second,
I didn't hear him correctly define any of the terms that we were going to be related to our topic today. Not yet.
So the second,
Jason, wants to have another try.
Ground rule would be just always be respectful. Let's have a civil discourse. And obviously, when we're talking about controversial topics or topics where we have different viewpoints on it, people can get emotional. That's fine. Emotion and passion is great, but just respectful. Obviously, not attacking people for who they are and what they know and their knowledge base and that kind of thing is what the expectation is. And thirdly, we're gonna do everything we possibly can to make the dialogue productive and keep it moving in a way that's going to add value to our viewers and listeners. So I apologize for not setting those ground rules earlier, but thanks for your grace on that. So, all right. So you said, Jason, that Tim did not define his terms properly. What, from the perspective of evolution not being a belief, I'm just going to go there right now. And Marcus, chime in if you want. But let's start with, what is one piece of evidence in support of evolution that you would say is completely irrefutable and in complete contrast to the creationist worldview? If you were to just give one example. I know you said there's many. Just give one that we can maybe start with.
Me?
Yeah.
I would go with Mendel's laws of heredity.
Okay.
For 500.
Okay. So can you explain that for everybody who's not familiar with that?
Well, I'm not entirely familiar with Mendel's laws of heredity either. I have to read up on that. I recommend that we all do that.
Okay. But you said that's irrefutable, though, so you know something about it, right?
Well, I know it's basically studied science. It's out there. We can look at the research all the way back. It's why genetics works. It's why DNA explains how we got where we are.
Tim, are you familiar with Mendel's laws of heredity?
Well, I'm not exactly sure where Jason's going with this, but I think what he's is implying is that we don't look exactly like our parents because we inherit part of our DNA from our mom, part of it from our dad, and so we're going to look like a combination of both parents, but we're going to be different. And as you move throughout history, these little changes, and from Jason's view, I think he would say would add up to big changes, so you can get one kind of creature becoming a different kind of creature. Whereas I would say that's never been observed. What you do observe is you have variation within a kind of creature. Humans are always going to have humans. Dogs will always have dogs. Cats will always have cats. There is variation, but there are limits because of DNA that are set. And I would say that that's consistent with a biblical view, not with an evolutionary view.
Where is DNA explained in the Bible? Can you give me a verse?
So it doesn't use the word DNA, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay. No, Jason, if you want to have a dialogue rather than just try to belittle or attack or make ad hominems toward me about where I work or something like that, it's a dialogue is a discussion. And so far, you've taken a few shots at me.
Is it an ad hominem that answers in Genesis is an oxymoron, or is that the truth?
That is an ad hominem because there are answers in Genesis. If you want to ask who was Abraham's son, the answer to that is found in Genesis. Okay,
Abraham
so
existed at all.
rather than mock the name of the organization, deal with the substance of the questions. And in this case, in Genesis chapter 1, 10 different times you read the phrase that God created either the plants or the animals that they would bring forth after their kind. So from a biblical perspective,
and it's not even straight on that order.
Well, hang on a second, Jason. Let him finish this.
From a biblical perspective, we would interpret that to mean that if you have the dog kind or you have the cat kind, whatever the category you're talking about, they're going to always bring forth after that kind. And that's all we have ever observed. We've never observed one kind of organism becoming another kind of organism, and DNA shows that that cannot happen. Whether it's natural selection or mutations, you never get new genetic information that is required to turn one kind of creature into another. You have variation within a kind, but you never get new kinds developing as a result.
Yeah, we're talking about the idea of microevolution versus macroevolution, and there's observable changes over time within a kind of a species, but never across species, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say not across species. I would say species is more specific than kind.
Pardon me.
Kind is roughly equivalent to a family level, but not always. It's just a different taxonomy. It's not that one is right, one is wrong. It's a different way of classifying things.
Yeah. So Jason, how did you come to tell us a little bit about your journey and really why you're so passionate about this, the conclusions that you've come to in terms of evolution being certain and having that level of certainty about it.
Well, long journey, but not much to tell. Just a lot of
faith is not defined the way that he defines it. Bible defines faith as
guys.
Sorry.
Apologize. Go ahead. Long journey, you said, Jason. Go ahead.
A long journey, but not much to tell. A lot of reading is what it would boil down to.
All right.
And yeah, I would just say, tell me, Tim, about how you arrived at this place where you decided to really dig in. You're working with an organization that really that purports creationism and defends that view. So how did you come into this, into apologetics, and into the context of where you are today?
Yeah, I've somebody who has been a Christian really all my life. I was raised in a Christian home, and I've always believed the gospel message to be true. But as far as getting into apologetics, that happened about 25 to 30 years ago in the 90s. It was something where I started to become really passionate about being able to find answers. Is it something that, is this a system of belief that makes sense? Does it, can I defend the resurrection of Jesus Christ historically? Because that's what the foundation of the Christian faith is Jesus dying on the cross and rising from the dead. And is this something that happened historically, or is this a pie in the sky religious belief? And I came to the conclusion, as many others have, even many atheists who set out to disprove the resurrection, that, yeah, actually Jesus did rise from the dead. And then really got interested in the creation versus evolution aspect of the discussion as well. And been focused on that for a little over 20 years now. And so now I'm doing what I love doing, and I get to work with some incredibly talented people. And speaking of genetics, I have a colleague who's a molecular geneticist, and she is a young Earth creationist. She would tell you all about Mendel's laws of heredity and how they confirm the biblical view, not an evolutionary view, in much more detail than what I can.
So there's a lot of scientists that you work with that answers in Genesis. I mean, you've had a Christian walk your entire life, Tim. And so part of the creationist worldview is an understanding, or maybe not understanding, but a acceptance of supernatural influence on creation and this earth, and as we progress day to day. And as we kind of get this thing kicked off, I just want to ask you, you shared with us as you submitted your information that you had a very personal experience when you were fighting a battle with leukemia.
Mm-hmm.
And you said it was something that defied, and it's piqued my interest, is that something that defied naturalistic explanations. Could you maybe explain what that experience was and how that supported your beliefs and maybe supported or even enhanced your beliefs in creationism?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, there's there are a lot of people who give testimony about being miraculously healed from some disease. Obviously, that doesn't happen in every case or in many cases, but there are a lot of people who do that. I was not miraculously cured of leukemia. I went through 4 rounds of chemotherapy. 15 years ago, right now, I would have been in the hospital and being treated for this. But during that time, there was one incident in the ICU when it was about a week after I checked into the hospital, and I was extremely ill. Every day my doctor would come in, flip through my chart and say, "Tim, your job today is to stay alive and wake up in the morning." That's where I was at. And there was one particular night where things were really getting pretty rough. My numbers were very, very, very grave, and it didn't really look like I was going to get through the night. And I remember telling my wife was there, my mom was there, and I said, "Look, if I fall asleep, this is it. I'm not going to wake up." Well, the next day and the following, of course, I was wrong. It happens once in a while, but the next day and the following day, we received emails from people that we had never met. One from a woman in Texas, one from a woman in California, and both of them said to this effect. They said that, last night at this time, I could not sleep. All I could think about doing was praying for Tim. I couldn't help. I didn't know if there was any urgent need. They both named the exact time that I told my mom and my wife that I wasn't gonna make it through the night. They had known about me through prayer lists. Church. I was put on prayer lists throughout the country from different churches, but they had no way of knowing what I was going through at that exact moment. And yet both of them named that exact moment. So for me, that wasn't God's going to miraculously cure me, but it was a comfort that, in my worldview, in my perspective, it was a way of God saying, "Hey, Tim, I know what you're going through, and we'll take care of it. You're okay." And from my perspective, if I got through it, great. I want to use the remainder of my life to serve Him. If I didn't, that's fine too, because I believe that I'm going to be with Him eternally, and that's even better.
Right. I appreciate that. So and the connection with the people that reached out to you, there was just nothing. There was no preconceived idea of what might be going on. And
no, there's really no way that they could have known that from an earthly perspective, from just a materialistic perspective. How would they have known that I would have said those things at that moment, over 1,000 miles away?
There's so many things I could ask right now, just because people are always looking for an explanation. I think one thing, and Jason, I'll probably ask you this at some point, but the idea of having empirical evidence for a creator, what qualifies as empirical evidence? Kind of taking that and what you're saying here, Jason, as far as how could people, a supernatural thing that people reach out to you at a very specific time about a very specific issue, if that does happen, a lot in the Christian worldview, people call those things like words of knowledge or, just the Holy Spirit. If you were to, how do I want to phrase this, to take that from a scientific perspective, I know one of the theories that's out there now, and Jason, I think you even mentioned the power of positive thinking from a quantum physics perspective. If things like that happen, is there some sort of scientific explanation for microscopic particles sort of interacting in such a way that information can be connected scientifically with those sort of things, like that kind of explanation for a supernatural occurrence? Have you, as science in your experience, Tim, have you experienced any sort of explanation or attempt to explain information that was given to you that could have otherwise never been given to you?
I haven't heard any explanation from a naturalistic perspective. It's not I don't base my faith on that event, on
Sure.
what happened there. For me, it was one personal, interesting detail. I mean, I was already a committed Christian long before that happened, and I have been since that happened. Going through the leukemia battle did not rattle my faith or shake it at all. If anything, it strengthened it. And it just was for me, it was a very comforting way. It was a source of comfort that, as if I knew God was right there saying, "Yep, I know what you're going through. Don't worry about it.
I appreciate that, man. Thanks for explaining.
Yep.
So, Jason, going a little bit back to what you were saying when it comes to just the overall defining of terms and beliefs, and you made a comment about the name of Tim's organization. I don't want to get really much more into that, but I do want to ask you, like, are you familiar with any of the work and Answers to Genesis? Have you done any research or any diving into the?
I've heard a little bit about it. Yeah.
Okay, because you seem to, when we were talking before, you knew about Ken Ham, right?
Yeah.
And what was there anything specific that you heard from Ken or any other person in this organization that piqued your interest, that either you dove into in more detail or that you wanted to ask a question about specifically that you read in Answers in Genesis?
I read into a little bit about the whole teaching creationism in schools, messing with the actual system of education.
Okay.
Well, I didn't read that in Answers in Genesis because that's never been our position. So we're accused of having that position, but the AIG has never pushed that as part of an agenda or anything.
Or I read about how they've got that the Disneyland for Christ Insanity, where you can go and find out that dinosaurs lived alongside humans and things like that.
Wait, say that again. In the Disneyland for when Christ you can learn about
Insanity, what? Where you can learn that humans and dinosaurs lived side by side or something like that.
Okay. All right. So that's a good.
Or Jurassic Park.
Yeah. Okay. I understand what you're saying. So maybe we could start there, because you did write an article, I think, and Tim, when I was researching your background and stuff, you did write an actual article on dinosaurs.
Sure.
I could probably put that link or something like that into the comments here as we get going. But why don't we start there? So, Jason, what would your comments would be on humans living alongside with dinosaurs?
Great movie.
All right.
Let's talk a little bit about it.
So well for the people in the movies, though.
Tim, share a little bit about the article you wrote on that.
I'm not sure which one you're referring to. I've written several, but I'll share our perspective on that.
I can find it. It's called. Here, I'll click on it right here. We'll go ahead. Share your perspective.
Okay. Yeah, our perspective on that would be that God created the land animals on day 6 of the creation week. So that was roughly 6,000 years ago, the same day that he made man. Dinosaurs were land animals, so they would have been made on the same day as man. Whether or not they lived right alongside each other, as Adam taking walks with T-Rex, that we're not saying that, but it doesn't mean that they couldn't have been.
Created on the same day is silly enough.
I'm sorry?
Created on the same day is silly enough.
Oh, well, that's your perspective.
Side by side. You can say same day, and it's just as silly as side by side walking.
All right, we'll stick with the dinosaurs before we talk about the same day.
Yeah, and it would sound silly if you're coming at it from a naturalistic worldview where you already accept evolution as fact. Then it's going to sound silly to you. But if you put yourself in somebody else's
realistic worldview,
if you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, it's not silly. It makes perfect sense. And when we look at the evidence out there, we see several
being realistic.
Hey, Jason, I was going to
talk over me.
Yeah, I got it. Jason, let's this is okay. I said a dialogue and not a debate, but I mean, please let him finish his sentence, and then I'll give you opportunity to talk. You know I will, man. We've done.
There are plenty of things that we can look at that would be consistent with our worldview on the issue of dinosaurs, and that whether that is coming from the soft tissue that is found in the T-Rex femur that Dr. Mary Schweitzer's team found in 2005. Prior to that, we were told, no, you can't ever find this kind of stuff in dinosaur bones because the soft tissue, the blood cells, that would never last for more than 10,000 years, let alone 67 million years, which is what they think this dinosaur is. And then since that time, we found soft tissue in another one. Do they question the age of those things? No, instead they just say, well, there must be an unknown process by which these things can be preserved for 67 million years, rather than saying, maybe they're not 67 million years old. And maybe what the creationists were saying was right all along. You also have different legends throughout history that in some cases they sound very similar to what we would call dinosaurs today. You even have pictographs and petroglyphs, carvings that look very similar to dinosaurs in some cases, made hundreds of years before we were digging them up out of the earth and putting them on display. All of those things are consistent with our view. They're not consistent with an evolutionary worldview.
But Jason, I'll let you respond, man.
Well, I don't even know how we can respond. I don't know how to have a discussion with that because, legends aren't science. They have legends to support their worldview. Well, great. That's not science. Don't bring religion to a science fight.
Okay, let's talk about
a knife to a gunfight.
Well,
yeah, that's really mischaracterizing.
You don't want to bring religion to a discussion of science.
Yeah, that's mischaracterizing what I said. But if that's all you can do,
that's exactly what you said.
No, I didn't say bring religion.
You're exactly right. Actually, the legends don't support anything.
Actually, they do. Legends often have a basis in reality.
You're right.
And I didn't cite only legends. I didn't cite only legends. I cited actual evidence from a T-Rex femur that has been found, soft tissue. That's not a legend. That's something that happened in 2005. And at first, the evolutionists said, "Oh, no, that can't be. Recheck it because that's got to be contamination." It wasn't. And how can we have? You can look it up on YouTube. How can we have reports of Dr. Jack Horner, who refuses to allow a dinosaur where they found soft tissue, that he refuses to allow carbon dating to be done on that because he said, "Oh, you'll never find any anyways." And yet, when people offer to pay for it, he refuses to allow carbon dating to be done on that. And here's why. He says, "Because I know what you guys would do with it. Because you're a creationist, I know what you do with the information." What information? If it's really 67 million years old, there will be no radiocarbon data in there. So what is he afraid of? Is he afraid of the science, or am I just talking legend again? You see, that's science.
You're talking legend. Answers in Genesis is legend. That's it.
All right, so let me ask some point of clarification.
That's the truth. It's an oxymoron.
Yeah, so again,
answers in
ad hominem.
Legend.
Ad hominem rather than deal with the evidence that I present.
So let me ask for clarification about your evidence, Tim, because you mentioned soft tissue and Dr. Jack Horner. First question is, who's Dr. Jack Horner?
So he is one of the leading paleontologists in the world. I think that Jason would probably acknowledge that as well. He's actually the one that Dr. Mary Schweitzer trained under, I believe. And but he is widely recognized as one of the leading paleontologists in the world. Evolutionist, believes in the millions and billions of years. So he's certainly no friend of young Earth creationists. But you can listen to that dialogue on YouTube about it, and he just flat out refuses, and he explains why.
And so another question then, with the soft tissue, why, just for the layman viewer, listener, why could soft tissue not be a million or billion year sort of phenomenon?
So this is what we have been told all along up until 2005, is that you'll never find any sort of soft tissue. The whole Jurassic Park thing, that's just a lark, even though it sounds cool that maybe you'd find the DNA, right. But you'll never find that, because these things, as soon as a creature dies, the body starts to break down. The cells start to break down very quickly. You'll never find DNA from things that are that old. You'll never find soft tissue. And especially if something is millions of years old, you would never find that. And then once Dr. Schweitzer's team found that, and other dinosaur bones have been opened up, and they're finding it in other ones as well, rather than saying, maybe these things aren't that old, what they're doing is they're interpreting according to their worldview, which is the billions of years in evolution. They're saying there must be a process by which these could be preserved for millions of years. Well, that's fine if you can propose one and that it would make sense. But what I'm saying is that find is perfectly consistent with what a creationist would expect, because we don't believe those things are actually that old. And so it fits our view. It is a difficulty for their view. Now, maybe they'll come up with an explanation that works at some point. That's kind of how science works, that you have a model, and as new discoveries come to light, either it confirms that model or you have to adjust it a little bit. And how often do we have articles in the news? In fact, it's like every week, where our entire understanding of human evolution has been reshaped because of this one find. And yet we're told all the time, here's how it happened. And then they change it every single week.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've noticed is that the evolutionary thought or theory has evolved. There's a new position when new information comes. So the science is always learning. It's not absolute. And say, Jason, why don't you? I'll give you a chance to respond to those statements. But science knows different information today than it knew however many years ago when it was doctors that were doing autopsies and then they would go and they would do surgeries and people were getting sick and they're like, oh no, you have to wash your hands. And these doctors that were saying, oh, you need to wash your hands. You guys are a bunch of quacks. You don't really need to do that. And now we realize that, wow, it's not good to do an autopsy and then deliver a baby because
it could be some
the baby's gonna get all these germs and viruses from the cadaver. So does science is there a learning curve to science, Jason? Does science evolve?
Sure. All the time.
So then science learns information that it previously had that could be wrong. Am I right?
All the time. Not just evolution, physics, medicine, chemistry, biology. I read about new discoveries in space every week. New discoveries on Mars that are changing what we used to think.
So isn't there a measure of faith as you define it in science that you have to apply?
No, because faith is believing that you already have the answer and reverse engineering back to the answer. Science is changing your belief to accommodate the next answer. So you follow the evidence with science.
Okay, do you have an example of when that's been something like a particular instance where someone has not started from nothing versus started with a preconceived presupposition of creationism that you're concerned about?
Wait, I'm sorry?
Or your statement about faith is when you start with a preconceived idea.
Oh yeah, God did it.
Yeah.
And then you work back to that.
Okay. And so
answers in Genesis instead of answers in 1,000 other books.
One thing I want to ask you about, Jason, a comment that you made earlier that you specified is you talked about there's where was it here? You talked about humans cannot mate with other animals that have evolved into humans, and so that was when I asked you about facts about evolution. You cited the fact that humans cannot mate with animals that we've evolved from. How is that in support of the evolutionary worldview in comparison to the creation worldview? And I thought it was just interesting how you brought that particular piece up in our exchange.
If evolution didn't work, then we would be able to crossmate.
If evolution didn't work, then we would be able to crossmate. Okay. But you don't think there's a creationist explanation for animals and humans not being able to mate? Is that what you were saying?
Can you give me a verse and chapter? I think you're going to find, Nick, that this is like DNA. It's not mentioned in the Bible.
Yeah, I can give you a chapter. Genesis chapter 1. The animals would bring forth after their kind, and humans are a distinct creation.
The same Genesis where the sun came before, where the earth came before the sun. And
sure. So change the topic rather than let me answer the other one.
It's still Genesis.
Yeah. So here's the thing.
The same
as we talked about before.
Well, let me answer your. So we asked about your question about the DNA, or not the DNA, but not being able to mate with animals.
We answered the question about the DNA. He said it's not there, which is going to be.
No, I said the word DNA is not there. So is the word email found in a science book that you read in 1600? Oh, email must not exist, or that science book must not be true. That's the fallacy you're making. It's really pretty silly. Okay. It's the lowest.
The scientists didn't have very much modern information. So God, when he was writing the Bible, seems to have had even less.
God didn't write the Bible. You don't even understand the biblical perspective, and you mock it.
The men who wrote the Bible had even less scientific understanding than the men who had the limited scientific understanding of the 1600s. So it's not a logical fallacy at all. It's just.
It is, because you're automatically assuming that they're wrong. Just that's chronological snobbery. That is a logical fallacy.
So I want Tim to answer the question I asked earlier about where in the Bible it talks about. You started to answer it, then
so
on to another topic.
Right, in Genesis 1, beginning with verse 24, I believe it is, it talks about how the land animals, they would bring forth after their kind. Okay, the same thing mentioned with the plants on day 3, they would bring forth after their kind. So as mentioned before, you're not going to have dogs breeding with cats. You're not going to have humans being able to breed with animals. So the example that Jason gave fits our perspective as well. So you can't, the way this works, it isn't that one piece of evidence is this is evidence for evolution, because every single piece of evidence can be used either for creationism or evolution. We look at the same fossils, we look at the same trees, the same stars, the same planet, we study the same things, but we've reached different conclusions because we have different lenses on, different worldviews, different perspectives, and we're interpreting that data through those lenses. And that's the way it is. The naturalistic evolutionary worldview is a view about our past, present, and our future. The biblical creationist worldview is a view about our past, present, and future, and all data gets interpreted through those lenses.
And Jason, you had another question about Genesis, or another comment about Genesis that maybe Tim could respond to.
I'll just share my screen. He was talking about how we have different perspectives.
All right.
I don't know if you can see it. So here's our.
Oh, I see. Hold on.
Hold
on. I can add it to the stream here. Hold on a second.
Yeah, here are our different perspectives in the data. So we have one worldview where we can change our beliefs from week to week as new evidence is incurred. And then we have the other one where we've already decided.
All
so
right.
He's talking about, that there's evidence for this or that in Genesis. Where is the evidence that the sky was created before the sea, or that dry land was created before the sea? We know that's not true. Or that plants were created on the same day as the seas and dry land, or that the sun, moon, and stars were created after the earth.
So that one you got right. The other three. That one you got right.
Evolution. Now you're talking about astrophysics. Now Neil deGrasse Tyson's going to jump your ass.
Okay, so let's take one topic at a time. The first one you brought up, you put a lot of them out there. What was the first thing you said as far as the?
I think you said something about the sky before the sea.
Just that, let's see this claim of it all being out of order. Let's see your evidence for it that goes contrary to the evidence of how it actually happened.
So several of the ones you mentioned are not even the biblical order. When you mentioned the sky before the sea, the earth was made out of water on day one. It does
depend on what chapter you're reading, because I think they switch it in Genesis. They couldn't even keep that straight.
Yeah.
I think the two creation stories of Genesis actually contradict one another.
All right.
You have Genesis not only contradicting science, but you have Genesis contradicting itself.
You've got a strange understanding of respectful dialogue, I guess. So
just throwing the truth out there.
So in other words, you want to jump in over the top of me, misrepresent the text over and over again. And when I try to clarify that, you jump over the top of me again. Okay. So the second chapter of Genesis does not contradict the first chapter of Genesis. It zooms in on what is happening on day 6. It doesn't mention the sea. So when we're talking about the sea in Genesis chapter 1, it makes no sense to even bring in Genesis chapter 2. Okay, so you're repeatedly talking about things that you don't even understand what it says, because rather than read it carefully and pay attention to it, you'd rather just mock it. So your evidence that you gave a little bit ago was a drawing that somebody made where the dots connect a little bit better for evolution than they do for God did it. Well, I could do the same sort of drawing where the dots would connect a little bit better for God did it rather than evolution. It's not evidence, but it is helpful to see how we both are looking at the same things. Yes, I could. In fact, that's
I have some annotation tools. You can draw on my screen. Let's pull that picture back up and you can prove it right now.
All right.
So Tim, I think it'd be valuable to let's hear explain.
Let's let him draw it. Let's let him show how he can.
If you want to see a really bad artist, you're looking at him. Okay. If I try to stick figure, you guys would all laugh. I work with extremely talented artists, but I am just left-brained. I cannot draw very well. But yes, I can draw little dots and connect them in a way that says God did it, and it would look better than the way the other one where it says evolution.
Here, let's do it.
All right. There's more valuable ways we can provide this information to people. But Marcus, go on with your question, man.
So, Tim, why don't you can you explain creation from your standpoint and how science and creationism in Genesis chapter 1 actually makes sense?
Sure. Well, first of all, when you're looking at the world around us, the natural world, where did everything come from? Did it just come about by random chance processes? I mean, we have so much complexity, so much order, so much information. Where have we ever seen information arise from non-information? Where have we ever seen intelligence arise from non-intelligence? Where have we ever seen matter arise from non-matter? All of those things make sense that there is a creator who made those things, a creator who is outside of time and space, as the Bible talks about. In the beginning, God created these things. He was there before these things. So that's consistent with Genesis chapter 1. It's not consistent with a worldview that says matter somehow is either eternal or it popped into existence at one point and then it rapidly expanded. And somehow in that you get a whole bunch of order, a whole bunch of information, a whole bunch of intelligence that comes about somehow. Okay. So just by looking at the world around us, I think that we can know that there is a creator. And when we look at the complexity, I think we can understand that he is, not only is he creative, he's also very intelligent. But the other issues we've been talking about, when we talk about the land animals we made on day 6, do I see evidence that these things that some of them were around for 65 to 200 million years? I don't, because I believe that when we look at those rock layers, the vast majority of those are caused by the worldwide flood. And so when we find dinosaur bones in those layers, then I believe that these are things that are that happened during the flood. So yes, they lived at the same time. All of those things are consistent within my worldview, and I can explain those things around us from a biblical perspective. So
how did the penguins walk across the ocean to Antarctica? That one bothers me. Can you explain that one?
I would love to, except for I don't have to, because we don't believe there were 7 continents on the earth prior to the flood. We believe there was one continent, because in Genesis 1 it says all the land was in one place, which seems to imply all the water was in one place. So I'm sorry, that all the water was in one place seems to imply that all the land was in one place as well. We believe that there
were 7 continents. The continental drift all occurred in the last 10,000 years.
We would say that the vast majority of it occurred during the flood, and that's what caused it. So
that would be measured in weeks and months, not in years.
Right, and there's computer modeling done by John Baumgartner called catastrophic plate tectonics.
I've seen computer modeling too, where the amount of water that would have had to fall from the sky in order for that to occur would have wrecked the ark.
Yeah, if you're assuming that Mount Everest was already there, but yet we believe that was a result of the flood. So you're putting in variables that we don't even hold to. You're putting in your variables, and then it doesn't work. So you don't need enough water to cover Mount Everest, because Mount Everest didn't exist yet. That is a post-flood mountain, and it's covered with fossils that were laid down by water, as are most other mountains in the world.
Well, one thing you got right is that Mount Everest didn't exist in the region where all of that stuff was written down as myths and legends. So they wouldn't have known about Mount Everest. That is true.
So we were at day 6. I think we were at day 6 before we had a little bit of a tangent in the animals. Can you continue from there, Tim?
What specifically?
So we were talking about the Genesis account and why it makes perfect sense, and you're just explaining God being an intelligent designer that's observable. Then you started kind of getting into the days of creation, and we were just unpacking the logical sequence and why scientifically it can be pressure tested. When I say pressure tested, it holds up against debate.
Yeah, I would go back to the phrase that we talked about earlier when it talked about animals bringing forth after their kind. That's all we ever observe. But that's what we see from genetics, that they don't become different types of animals. Dogs will always have dogs. Yeah, their puppies are going to look a little bit different than mom and dad, but they're always going to be dogs. And that's what the Bible talks about when it says they're bring forth after their kind. As far as the order of events, that's one of the reasons I brought the flood in as well. And I talked about that because when an evolutionist looks at those rock layers, they assume slow, gradual, long periods of time, maybe local catastrophes at certain places as well. But they see that as a record of hundreds of millions of years of slow, gradual development. And I would say, no, those things are an order of burial during the flood. So it's 2 different ways of looking at the exact same data. And there are empirical ways that you can demonstrate those things were laid down rapidly. rather than slow
You
and
can also
gradual.
compare it to the light from other stars, which they do with astrophysics, and you can see that the timelines for evolution match the timelines for the light from other stars. So the only one that's running contrary is your 7-day creation and your 40 days of flood. Hilarious.
So the timelines for the star
Yeah,
timelines.
you can measure the light that comes from other stars, and it left from that other star to reach us before all of the myths and legends were even written down. Before their God even existed, this light was traveling across the universe to reach our telescopes. You compare that to the rock strata in evolution or in geology, and it matches. You can see that it's not a stretch for the Earth to be 4.5 billion years old, because you can compare the sun to other stars. You know the ages of other stars.
Tim, I want to give you a chance to respond to the star comment, but I did have one question for Jason based on what you said earlier, because about producing after your own kind. Jason, what is your take and perspective on the transition of species from an evolutionary worldview?
One more time.
What is your take on the transition of species from an evolutionary worldview?
Like macro?
Right.
Yeah, I saw this in a discussion the other day, and I think the best comment was that macroevolution has never been observed. Well, you're not going to observe it. You're going to see it in computer models. You're going to see that the math lines up. See, you can't argue mathematics, but his argument a moment ago was, oh, we can go outside and we can look around and see that this is how it is. Well, no, we can't. But we can measure and we can do the math, and we can accept the answers that the math gives us. But just making it up and trying to reverse engineer answers from a Bronze Age myth, I don't think that's going to work out.
So I'll let you provide any resources in the comments here, Jason, for the mathematical models that have been developed, so we can look at them and see what they're all about. Because I'm not really sure exactly what you're talking about with the math model. I mean, I think there was a reference to Dawkins' book in that perspective, but I'm not personally familiar with mathematical models. I don't know, Tim, do you know anything about the mathematical models he's referring to?
I would assume that he's just talking about how you can have so many mutations per generation that given thousands to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands generations, which you're not going to observe that in one lifetime, then it would equal the changes required for what evolutionists would say. Jason, is that a fairly accurate way of describing what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I would say that, again, we've never observed that just because you can input data into a formula, it does not mean that everything that you're putting in there is accurate. So, of course, it's going to yield it goes back to the old saying in the 80s when computers were first becoming popular: garbage in, garbage out. It depends on what you put into the program that's going to calculate. And you can't just assume that because if you have, let's say, 80 mutations in one generation, that's always going to happen. And even if you do get those mutations, most of the time they're harmful and they're never adding new genetic information. So how is it going to give rise to things that don't exist already? The examples we get all the time from evolutionists of how of a creature that turns into another kind of creature, it's always, well, this one type of organ, this one kind of fish changes a little bit and it's still this type of fish, or this type of beetle changes a little bit, like it loses its ability to fly, and see that it's losing information. It's not gaining information. And we don't have any examples where this new information comes about through these different naturalistic processes. So I don't see any examples for that. I would like to respond to the starlight issue if I can.
Sure. I didn't want to lose that thought, though. Jason, what would you say about observational science proving living organisms gain genetic information? What would you say about that before he answers the
needs to read more Dawkins. But if we need a place to look to observe that Darwinian algorithms work, it's right here. We're using it right now to talk to each other. The artificial intelligence that's keeping our internet connection stable is using Darwinian algorithms as we speak to keep us connected. So thanks, science. Bye, guys.
All right.
It's good to be here.
Oh, you're leaving?
Huh?
Oh, no.
No, I was just
Okay.
making a joke that it's good to be here because, if we tried to stay connected on the internet using biblical science, we wouldn't get very far. We'd still be saying, hey, Tim.
All right, Tim, I want to let you respond to the light
Yeah,
concept that's brought up.
Yeah.
I need a good laugh.
Yeah. So when he says using biblical science, what he's saying is the technology of the first century or earlier. And of course, that's absurd to say that that's what biblical science is. Okay. God created an orderly universe, and he created human beings in his image who are intelligent, and he gave them dominion over this world so that they can use the things in this world to develop things that are going to be beneficial for mankind. All of the technology, all that's consistent with a biblical worldview. As far as the starlight issue,
Really, I would say if he started him off in the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, that he wasn't very good at planning.
So as far as the starlight issue, Jason and I have the exact same problem. They have what's called the horizon problem from the Big Bang perspective, where they have to artificially inflate the speed of expansion early on in order to account for things, because they don't have enough time, even in their 13.7 to 14.3 or 16.6, however many billion years it is now. They change it all the time. So they don't have enough time in order to get all the heat dissipated throughout the universe what they think they're observing through the cosmic microwave background radiation. And so they come up with it's called the horizon problem. Anybody can look that up and see that they have the same problem that we do. Maybe not to the same scale, but it is still an issue. So young Earth creationists, I'm not an astrophysicist. The co-author of my first book is. He would be able to address this issue in much more detail than I could, Jason Lyle. But there are several models that creationists have developed that could explain how you can get light from stars that are billions of light years away here within a short time period. Remember, light years is not a distance. It's not a measurement of time. It is a measurement of distance. Okay, the name, I think, sometimes fools people, but it is measurement of distance. And there's an assumption that Jason made already that light left that star long before these books were written down. That's an assumption. Okay, now it may seem like a
measurement, actually,
but it is an assumption. He wasn't there to see when it left. He didn't observe that. He's assuming certain things about the distant past, assuming that these things happened without a creator who can do things supernaturally. So all of those are built into it. It's a belief about the past.
How old are you?
I'm sorry?
Tim, how old are you?
Well, I think I'm safe in talking about my age. So I'm 47.
But that's just your best guess.
No, this is something that's been documented.
But you weren't there to see it.
I was there to see my birth. I was there. I was there. Now, I don't remember it, but I was there, but other people were there. My mom was there. My dad was there. My doctor was there. And my siblings, they weren't in the room, but my older brother and sister, they were there.
What's your point, Jason?
The point is that we can measure age. The point is that we're not just making up the age of the light that left a star. It's been measured. I didn't have to be there.
No, you're calculating a distance.
If you take a measurement at a job site, and you send that measurement to the shop and tell them I need a piece cut at this measurement, and they measure the piece and they cut it, and then they send that piece to the job site, it's the correct length. Why?
Because you're talking about distance. You're talking about observable distance.
Because we can measure something, and we can.
You're conflating observable distance with time. Okay, so there's a difference between your example at the job site and.
Actually, I think that.
Actually, what?
Yeah, in my example, time and distance are related.
Because there's an assumption that it has always been that way, and that God couldn't have made it in such a way where the light would be reaching Earth on day 4 when he made the sun, moon, and stars, or by day 6 so that Adam would see.
God would have had to have made it in order for that to happen.
Yeah, and so you already automatically ruled that out. So it's part of your worldview. And that's what I've been explaining the whole time.
No, it's part of reality. My worldview is simply that I pay attention to the mathematics and the measurements and accept reality.
And you
Jason, I think
that go into it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Marcus.
No, I was going to say, so the mathematician is making certain assumptions, right? And let's make sure that we agree on that there are assumptions made in these scenarios. So
So if
there weren't assumptions, then science would never change.
Two orange. How many fruits do we assume that I have?
I didn't hear the beginning of that. I was talking. I'm sorry.
If I have 2 apples and I have 2 oranges, how many fruits do we assume that I have? We would assume that I have 4 fruits, right?
That's observable.
Is that an assumption?
That would be observable.
That's a mathematics.
Okay. So if what you're talking about, when we're dealing with the non-observable past, you're making assumptions about that, and you're conflating that with the observable present. Science is supposed to be able to test,
math works the same,
retest, and form hypotheses and observe these things happening. And yet, when what you're continually talking about, you're conflating that with what would be called historical or origin science, where it's not there to observe. You're making certain assumptions about the past, assuming things have always been the way they are right now. And then when somebody points out assumptions, no, there's no assumptions. Of course there are. There's always assumptions when you're dealing with things that happened in the past. And if there weren't, then the science would have been settled a long time ago. It wouldn't be changing all the time and being updated as new discoveries come to light. There are assumptions worked into it. Even with the dating methods, there's huge assumptions that go into all of those things. And I would say the best way to know the age of something is to find a reliable record of the one who was there, of somebody who was there, a reliable historian. In the case of my birth, I trust my parents on that one, and I trust the doctor who signed the birth certificate. So I think I know exactly when I was born. In the case of the Earth, I trust the one who made it and his record of it, rather than people who are set against him saying it's ridiculous that somebody could have made this and try to explain the world without it, even though there are so many things that they cannot explain.
So let's see Adam and Eve's birth certificate then.
I want to.
They weren't born. They were created as adults.
So I want to ask, as we wrap up, because we're getting on time here, and I really appreciate the dialogue, and I appreciate, again, the passion behind the perspectives in both cases. So kind of looking at the purpose of what we're doing this for, it's really to unpack the tension, because there's tension here, right, with different worldviews of situations. And so we always want to really, for me, this is me personally, and Marcus and I talk about this all the time, there's an echo chamber effect. And it's worse now than it ever has been, right? Because we have surveillance marketing, we have people trying to sell us things, and we're continuously being given media and articles and products that relate to the things that the data, the models predict that we like, right? So we're going to see more and more of what we like and less of what we don't like or what we don't agree with. And so I really, truly feel passionate about one way that me personally, I get to really hear both sides of a discussion is to have this platform. It's one of the few that we can do this sort of thing. And I think it's valuable to get together and have these open discussions. So I guess my question for both of you, Jason, I'll ask you first, is how important is it for you to be open-minded and listening to other points of view from a holistic perspective, not necessarily this evolutionary discussion?
Oh, well, I was going to answer that question wholly related to evolution. As far as having a discussion like that, I mean, the only discussion that's to be had right now is if something could have occurred in a certain amount of time or not. That's really the only discussion. But like I said at the beginning, you can't even get off the ground in a discussion like this. The discussion is between science and science, is which scientist is right, which way is it going to change next week. But there is no discussion between religion and science. I'm sorry. There just isn't. It's reality versus myths. I mean,
how is non-religion different than religion?
What's that, Marcus?
How is non-religion different than religion?
Well, define terms. What is non-religion? You mean an atheistic worldview?
The attributes of the naturalistic perspective versus a creationist perspective both have certain assumptions. They have certain tenets. They have dogma. They have voices that are exalted and esteemed, and methodologies that are said to be the only way. Is there really a difference between when we throw the stone of religion versus science? Science can be a religion to some, can it not?
No. No. Completely different. They have their exalted figures and they have their assumptions and they have all of that, but the big difference is that science can be proven and religion, there's no evidence whatsoever. They have the same amount of evidence for the Bible God as they have for Zeus, as they have for Mithra, as they have for Odin. In fact, I have even more evidence for Odin than for Jesus Christ, because Jesus did promise the end of all evil people. Odin promised the end of frost giants, and I don't see any frost giants around here.
I want to let Tim respond to my original question.
Either, but I'm at home.
Jason, I want to let Tim respond to my original question. Then I want to ask you a question about what you just said. So go ahead, Tim.
Sure.
How important is it to have an open mind and dialogue with others from different points of view?
I think it's very important to have dialogue like that. I think it's helpful for everyone involved if you can have a civil discussion so that people can be aware of the assumptions that are out there. You talked about it, that we are in echo chambers. Social media has made that more, I think, worse than ever before, because you surround yourself with people, like-minded people, and you ignore those who have different perspectives. And so you're constantly getting this feedback loop of people who agree with you, and you tend to think of everybody who is outside of that as being ignorant or foolish. Jason thinks that my view is complete ludicrous, that I must be a moron, that the place I work at is just absurd and it's an oxymoron. Rather than recognizing that, no, there are intelligent people in every one of these perspectives, and we have reasons why we've come to the conclusions that we have, and it's important to hear from those people why they have those. If we want to treat people with dignity and respect, we need to recognize them as human beings who have value, which, by the way, that's consistent with a biblical worldview, that all people are made in God's image. From an evolutionary worldview, we're not really valuable at all. We're just the same thing as a blade of grass, or as a tree, or as any other piece of matter that's out there. So there really is no point anyways. But from our perspective, we do have value, and we are commanded to love one another, to love our enemy, to love our neighbor. That's what Christ commanded us. The whole idea that he has more evidence for Odin than for Jesus, I'm assuming all the people who saw Jesus don't count. I'm assuming all the people who saw him crucified don't count. The people who saw him alive again, they don't count. We throw out all of that evidence. The secular writers who wrote about Jesus, we don't get to count them either. So if you ignore all the evidence for it, then you don't have evidence for him.
Jesus promised no more evil people.
When did he promise that?
In the Bible.
Where?
He promised the end of evil people. He promised he would return before the end of the lifetime of the 12.
No, he promised that he would return and that sometime he would put an end to evil. And that's going to happen.
And there's not been an end to evil, but I don't see any frost giants. So it seems that Odin got rid of the frost giants long before Jesus was able to make good on his promise.
Jason, one time, one thing that's come up over and over again is just a reference to mockery. What is there value in mockery?
Oh, I think so. I think we need to. I think one of the greatest tricks of religion was not convincing some people that there's a magic man in the sky, but convincing the rest of us that you can't ridicule a ridiculous idea.
So I think what's ridiculous
That's the greatest trick of religion, I think.
I think Jason would do some good by going to a website called History for Atheists. And this is written by an atheist who destroys a lot of the arguments he's been making about Jesus or about the historicity of Jesus. And it's an atheist who says, look, my fellow atheists are making a huge mistake by making these arguments. There is so much historical evidence for the existence of...
I've seen a different one.
And yet he's just going to ignore it because he wants to promote something with a lack of evidence. So when it comes to the historicity of Jesus, it is a settled matter. Okay. Not only do you have
it is a settled matter. There are still evil people, but there are not frost giants.
And yet, is it a settled matter that there ever were frost giants, Jason? So you're mocking by showing something that's ludicrous, and you don't have any evidence there were frost giants, and you don't see them anymore. So therefore, not Jesus, right? It's absurd the number of logical fallacies you make when we talk about these, because you're just mocking. It's not valuable to mock in a civil discussion. It weakens your position. Anybody watching this with a fair mind would say, Tim has given reasons for why he believes this. He's been patient, and yet Jason will talk over him and mock.
You haven't given any reasons, though. That's the problem.
Purport
was the word of the day, Marcus. You purported to give reasons.
Jason, if
haven't
God,
given any reasons, not a single one. I don't even know how to respond to half of this.
Jason, I want to close. I want to close the
Christopher Hitchens
discussion.
says ridiculous ideas deserve to be ridiculed. That's all I can say.
Right.
If you don't want to be ridiculed, get some ideas that are not ridiculous.
Jason, I want to close by asking a question, then having you just go ahead and give your any closing remarks you want for our audience, everybody watching, and that will be listening on the future podcast. If God existed, what would you ask him?
I would say flawed question. I would ask him why he can't prove that he exists. Okay. And what closing statements did you have for the audience, man? Appreciate your time today. I really do. Jason. Well, I would say wake up, please. Don't follow the ignorance. Read a book. Read more than just one book. The answers aren't in Genesis, but there are other books out there. And I would rather read 1,000 books and remain a skeptic than read one book and believe I have all the answers. Appreciate your time, Jason. Tim, what would you have to say to our audience in closing?
Yeah, I would say that God's word is true from the beginning to the end. It's not just one book, it's 66 books. But most importantly, the fact of the matter is that for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. That's what it comes down to, is what are we going to do with Jesus Christ? And a person can mock that their entire life. They can ridicule it. They can try to set it aside. But the fact of the matter is Jesus walked and talked on this earth. He fulfilled multiple prophecies in the process. And he said he was going to die and rise again. And he did. And it's been called one of the most well-proven events of ancient history for a reason, because there are all sorts of historical reports that confirm that. And if Jesus died and rose, as the Bible says and as other reports say, then Christianity is true. Regardless of what one thinks about Genesis, Christianity is true. And ultimately, it comes down to, what are you going to do with Jesus Christ? So if you're a Christian, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's what we're commanded to do. And I hope that I can fulfill that, and we'll do that. And Jason, I want to thank you for taking time today to have a discussion. Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Marcus, I want you to close, but before I forget, Jason, how could our listeners, if you wanted them to, or if you were open to them reaching out to you, how could they do that? What's the best way to do that? It appears I'm going to be probably connected to Facebook for the interminable period. Yeah, they'll find you on Facebook. They'll see you in the stream now, actually. So appreciate that. How about you, Tim?
Yeah, I've got an author page on Facebook. Don't use my personal one, but the professional and author page. And then for the ministries that I represented today, answersingenesis.org. And then, the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter have their own websites and Facebook pages.
Great. And we will link to this. So what happened to the stream will be turned into a podcast, and we'll have links to resources, and probably read both of y'all's bios a little bit more upfront and that kind of thing for people that weren't able to watch the stream. Marcus, we always close it with Marcus's words of wisdom, MP's words of wisdom. What do you got, Marcus? Any final words?
No, I think it's really important to build connection and relationships with those that are outside of our schools of belief. And it's interesting, we talk to a lot of different people from different perspectives, and it's one of the themes that I always see in all of our audience and all of our guests is there is a really heart to help humanity and help one another. And I think it's important to really, in these type of discussions, build a sense of connection, and that we're all living this human experience. We're all going through very similar struggles in very similar ways. And it's really important to give time to hear other points of view. So I appreciate both you, Jason, and you, Tim, coming on today. And we look forward to this being produced and getting out there. Thanks so much, guys.
All right. Thanks for having us.
It's been fun. And everybody commenting, I appreciate it. Couldn't get all the comments up there, but any questions, go ahead and ask them in the replay or whatever, and we'll do our best to respond. So, all right, you guys have a great day. Thank you again so much for your time. It's been really interesting, and I got a lot of value from it. It's been hilarious. Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. And Jason, I hope you get better soon with the accident.
All right, thanks, Tim. I'm going to end it. Tim, hang on a sec. I'm going to end the.
I think he bounced.